Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and get back into it if we could. If you all could give Mr. Shields your attention. Let's go ahead and move on to the next phase of our discussion if we could. Mr. Shields, let's move on to budget development planning.
Okay.
Melissa, I don't know if this is going to be you once again, but thank you all for the good work.
It will be Melissa, and Hunter also has provided a couple of slides that we will have, and so it's an integrated presentation. Just in terms of a quick setup, what our goal tonight is to lay out what we see today in terms of a revenue forecast. We want to identify what we think will be the major cost drivers. We will not present exactly a gap at this point because we don't have all the numbers on the cost side, but we will lay out, we will compare against what we envision our revenues being against some of the known costs that we will have to address. For instance, the WMATA costs and other fixed costs that we know we'll have to pay for. And that will be a pretty stark and sobering look when you compare that to the revenues that we have. This all is a setup for the Council's discussion on budget guidance, and that is currently scheduled for consideration on December 12th. And we also, at the very end of tonight's meeting, we do have a copy of the budget of the financial policies if there's a desire to have any discussion or referral to those financial policies as a setup for the December 12th meeting as well. But so first, I will turn it over to Melissa, and she will walk us through a presentation on the items that I just mentioned.
Good evening again, Council and school board members. This is the fiscal year 2018 preliminary forecasts and capital funding presentation. Wyatt has kind of touched on this earlier in his introduction, but I'll just quickly go over the agenda. So we've already discussed the capital funding requirements sort of during Wyatt's initial presentation, former presentation. We're going to look at fiscal year 2018 preliminary revenue projections, and I call out the word preliminary. And then we will also indicate some cost drivers that we're currently seeing, known costs that we know are coming on board. For the schools and general government, we'll provide an illustration of just one way of looking at what, distilling the facts that we're presenting you tonight. And then we'll go through the budget calendar and give a summary and the key issues that we're facing it with this year. So for revenue growth, we are projecting a 3% revenue growth with a range of 2.5% to 3.5%. We are still early in the fiscal year to see how FY17 is doing against our projections. So we'll have changes to this come January, February timeframe. That does mean $2.4 million, $2.5 million of new revenues for both the general government and schools. In high level, the expenditure needs we have for our capital program, we will need some pay-go money for maintenance and for equipment. And as we've discussed earlier, reserves for the George Mason High School project. On the operating side, there will be some increases in WMATA, and school enrollment is going to drive some of the costs in the school board, as well as remaining competitive on the compensation side for our staff. In the region, just to give you an idea, assessment value growths have been minimal in the region. Arlington is projecting a 2.1% total AV growth, including new construction. Fairfax County is projecting 1.4% AV growth, and Falls Church is actually doing a little bit better at 2.75%. That's what we're projecting right now. And go ahead. sorry.
Do we think we're being too aggressive then, given what our neighbors are projecting?
This is actually something that the real estate assessor had provided me, and he indicated that the reason Fairfax County is actually dragging down at 1.4% is because they have a lot of industrial sites and also land areas like golf courses and things like that that are just not, that are kind of dragging the increases right now. So apartment buildings are actually doing better in Fairfax County, but they are being dragged down by these other types of commercial activity, which we don't have.
Let's say Arlington at 2.1.
Correct. I mean, again, this is a number that I have from the real estate assessor's office, and he's pretty confident that we're going to be around that number. He is still processing sales information for December, though, so I just want to point that out. There is also one thing that also does distinguish us currently is that we have a lower than average in the Virginia region, Northern Virginia region, vacancy rates in the commercial sector. Our vacancy rates are about 6%, whereas the Northern Virginia average, including Arlington and Fairfax County, they're looking at 16 to 18% commercial vacancy rates. The county is also experiencing significant drops in federal procurement. Right? So just to kind of emphasize how important the real estate assessment value is in our revenue projections, this pie chart shows that 60% of our revenues do come from real estate taxes, with about another 25% coming from other taxes, VPOL, meals tax, sales tax, personal property tax. And the other taxes include amusement taxes, recordation taxes, cigarette taxes, and communications taxes. Yes?
Quick question. On that 59%, how much would you say, or just ballpark, is residential versus commercial in the city? I know it's huge. I mean, a huge portion of it is residential, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, about 22% of it is commercial. About 9% of it is apartments now. That's been going up.
That's been going up. I'd have to go back for that number.
And then the remainder is residential.
Again, just to kind of break down what the increases are in excess value in the residential, we're projecting a 2% increase, with 1.2% being from market activity increases, and 0.8% from new construction, and that's about $15 million, which is a projection for now. This is what we've had in the past several years. On the commercial side, it is a 4.5% increase, with 1.75% from market increases and $30 million in new construction. Overall, it's that's what we're counting as the 2.75% AV growth. This kind of just shows where we are in the region as far as real estate taxes. These are the cities above are sort of our peer in population, with Fairfax City down here also our peer. So other than Fairfax City, we are sort of the lowest in the region on the small side, the small population cities and towns. So this is another representation of that information. This is Falls Church, and again, this is our peer population, with the outliers being Manassas Park and Fairfax City. Just to take down further on some of our other taxes that we consider to be the sort of the economic indicators for our budget. Personal property, we budgeted $5.2 million in FY17. To date, we've seen better performance on that at $5.5 million, and so we're projecting a 6% growth, and that is something we will look at that might maybe adjust in the next few months. And this is just a representation of the graph over several, the activity over several years on personal property tax. Sales taxes, due to the new development that we had this year, we did already budget a 12% growth over last year in sales taxes, and first quarter is looking pretty good. It's meeting our targets. We're going back to a normal average growth of 3% in FY18, absent any other indications otherwise. And this is just a graphical representation of what's been happening over the last few years on sales tax. Meals tax, we did budget as just a slight increase in FY17, and we're kind of doing a little bit better than that this year. So we'll be watching that closely in the coming months. I've currently modeled 3% growth on the meals taxes, and that is sort of going to a 3-year average of increases, 3 to 5 year average of increases over the last several years on that. As you can see on this, meals tax is pretty stable. Beginning 2014, it's steadily increasing, but not huge, dramatic leaps. Overall revenue forecast, again, just recapping, 2.75% growth is projected for real estate. Other revenues are about 3.3%, with a total revenue growth of about 3%, for a total new revenue of $2.5 million. Now, on the expenditure side, just to, before we delve into detail, just to give you an idea of what we've been doing over the last several years on the general government, both of these numbers exclude debt service. On the general government side, 7-year average is 2.2, 5-year average is 4.0, and we come back down to a 3-year average of 1.7. This does reflect kind of coming out of the recession and taking care of the things that we needed to take care during that time frame. You'll see the same pattern in the school transfer, with 7-year average being 4.8, 5-year average going up to 7.7, and 3-year average coming back down 5.7%. Now, going into the known increases that we're facing in, I'll talk about the general government side, and Hunter and perhaps Bob are going to talk about the school cost drivers in the next few minutes. So on the retirement side, oops, sorry. All right. The asterisk was to indicate that this was from our actuarial valuation. Sorry that came off the presentation, but we are expecting a $220,000 increase in retirement costs, and that is mostly due to a change in mortality tables that was used in this year's actuarial valuation. It was recognized by the pension board that we have been using an older version of the mortality rates. I want to say it's from the 1980s, and they've changed it to a more current one, which is more indicative of longevity and mortality rates in the last several years. So that was the main reason for that increase. Health insurance, we don't actually have numbers right now from our provider. We are plugging in a 15% increase, just because last year we had a 26% increase, and the current indicators are not such that we would think that we'd remain flat in that aspect. That will change. We do just want to point out that that's one thing that we're concerned about. Yes.
Mr. Ryman, I remember it was either last year's budget or the year before where we ended up changing the health insurance based on what the cost was. And I know that last year we were past the point when we could actually make changes. What is that date, just so that we know and can manage towards that if we need to use that as a lever? I know it's not something we take lightly, but.
I think we'd have to get back with you on that date. It's probably, it would need to start now.
Early.
Pretty much. Yeah.
I mean, it would have been something that we have been looking at earlier than today, just because we would have to competitively procure that, gather some data as far as experience. Not to say that we can't still do it, but the sooner the better. And are we looking at that right now?
It's not currently on our work plan to put it out to bid.
Do we think we're going to need it as an option, though?
I have maybe a naive view that if they bumped us up that much last year, that we're going to get a break this year. But I don't know. I don't know how that.
I just want to make sure that we don't leave that as an option and then realize we needed it.
So just to follow up on that question, if I could. So when is it we find out, quote, what the new rate is?
Yeah.
It will be January. Okay.
And then
Last year we found out
In March.
a bit
and that was-
later. It was March.
Yeah.
So
They thought they were doing us a favor by and actually they did. They did by including additional months of experience, which actually brought the increase down. But we found out extremely late last year.
So we're anticipating finding out in January. If we don't like the rate, what do we do in January?
I think we'll have to consider what our options are, and I'll need to get back with you in terms of what exactly the steps would be to procure that.
I mean, at a minimum,
Insurance.
we should have as much leverage as we can,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that would be a good idea to at least contemplate what an alternative would be.
Mm-hmm.
Because 26% is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Thanks.
on the plus side, we are seeing a decrease in our required contribution for retirees health insurance, and that is actually mainly due to a change that we made last year in our health insurance coverage, where we only started we're now only providing Medicare supplement to our retirees, whereas previously we were on a full benefit plan. They have the option to choose plans A, B, C, D, or whatever Medicare provides. And on top of that, we're providing a little bit to supplement that. Yeah.
And have you withdrawn any piece of that, the main part? I mean, they still have the A and B, but you're saying that you're only offering the supplement now,
Right.
but
Correct.
you're not offering the parts A and B.
Oh, we're not. Medicare is doing that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. Thanks.
Yes. So our retirees now have Medicare as their first provider and the city as their secondary provider. So that gave us some significant savings on that side. And absent any plan changes, we should continue to see the reduction, this new level of funding for our OPEB plans. On the WMATA side, they did just present their proposed budget for both operating and capital. Operating came out in November, and capital just came out recently in December 1st. We are looking at cash contribution increase of $500,000. 200. We'll go through in more detail what that is. And then we put in here PAYGO capital maintenance. This year we used the remainder of our land sale proceeds to fund PAYGO, and that was $670,000. So we're putting in that we should continue that funding. Now, this is just showing half of that with the rest of it on the school side. But we are recommending continuing that funding so that we don't fall back again on our capital plan.
Mr. Ryman, one question on that. Is that assuming we adopt, I know we'll talk about financial policies next, is that assuming we adopt the $1 million a year PAYGO reinvestment?
Correct.
This is the first part of that?
Although this is half of that $600,000 requirement.
So the 600,000, there'd be 300,000 for schools, 300,000 on general government. That's generally where we want to be at a minimal level of capital reinvestment.
And that's predominantly for facilities, and FY17 is the last of PAYGO or any money for reinvestment on regular maintenance of facilities besides the big capital projects we've been discussing.
So on WMATA, currently our cash contribution is $3,034,182. For FY18, they're asking in round numbers. We don't have the exact numbers as yet. $500,000 total, and that's made up of $200,000 in PAYGO capital contribution, for which 85% we've been told are already planned investments that are already underway. So a lot of the discussion had been, well, can we push back on that? Can we defer them? And the answer had been that, well, 85% of what we're planning to do in FY18 is already underway.
So this is smart track and things like that.
Rail cars, rail tracks, things like that.
That are already under contract and
Committed. $300,000 in operating. And the reason for that is they are projecting a 10% decrease in revenue.
From fares?
From fares, correct, and parking. 2% increase in costs, operating costs, and that turns into a total of about 15% increase in overall local subsidy from all the jurisdictions participating in Metro. Yes, Maribeth?
Is this just a one-year thing, or are they telling us it'll be another $500K the following year and the following year?
It's not cumulative, but certainly this is a new level of funding. I don't. They did present some 6-year numbers, which has that information.
we're doing a conference call at the staff level with WMATA tomorrow, and also are in the beginning stages of discussing the capital financing agreement, which is a 5-year plan. Council recall earlier in the spring we adopted a 1-year extension of their plan, and so we're looking at the out years. But 18, 19 through 22 doesn't see a major drop down. It's going to be continuing at this level and slightly up as reinvestment into the infrastructure happens.
Now, speaking of the capital funding agreement, in addition to the $500,000 increase in cash contributions, we may be called upon to provide $1 million in something that we can debt finance. Now, we can either debt it ourselves, like issue the bonds ourselves, or opt in with a WMATA debt, where they will issue the debt and we pay an annual debt service on that. So they're estimating about $1 million of that for this year.
So why we didn't count any of this towards the debt models we just looked at?
We did not.
Thank you.
We literally just, we found out a few days ago, sorry.
Is that $1 million in debt or $1 million in debt service?
This is $1 million in debt in FY18. Now, as Cindy alluded to earlier, we are not seeing any drop off until 2022, 2021. So they're expecting $1 million every year from us in the next few years.
Over and above everything else.
Over and above everything else.
And what's the service on that approximately on an annual basis?
And it's probably going to be a bit lower than this, but okay, so just looking at that, So on the $1 million, this is in addition to the $500,000 cash contribution. State funding is possible at around 25%, depending on the types of assets that are being funded with this $1 million. Currently, we are receiving between 17% and 34% on most capital items from the state. So we don't know yet exactly how much we're going to get since this is very new. But with that, so we could be looking at $750,000 from us and $250,000 from the state. So possible debt service, depending on interest rates, obviously, could be between $130,000 to $170,000 a year.
That would start next year.
On the $1 million.
It's principal and interest, not just interest.
Right.
And you're anticipating that would be each year there'd be another $1 million for a
Right.
few years?
Hang on one second. I have their capital budget.
While you're looking at that, Cindy, could we use the toll money from I-66 for any of this? Do you know?
Toll money cannot be used for WMATA on the operating, but yes, for some of the capital. Also, 30% NVTA can be used for WMATA like we're doing this year. We need to keep the investment in the CIEDO in order to have the match to get your 30%.
Okay.
We can probably
Okay.
get back.
We can get back to you on that. Also, the capital funding agreement is still in progress. A lot of jurisdictions are discussing this proposed budget from WMATA. Everybody's sort of in a shock mode and digesting this right now. They do intend to adopt the budget in March 2017. That's the current plan. I think last year they actually didn't adopt it until May.
We're having a lot of discussion, sort of a catch-22. We need to know what they're planning so we can provide their budget, but it's hard for them to adopt the budgets till the localities have approved their budgets, so. And additionally, we're still continuing the work with the state to push for increased funding for capital and their support of Metro and all transit statewide so that it's all borne on the localities for WMATA.
Is there any word on Metro at least hearing us out on restoration of 2 bus lines they've cut out, or is it still their position that they're going to tell us what's best for us and not hold additional hearings on those 2 bus lines that our constituents keep reminding us that they want?
That is certainly a discussion that DDS planners and I are bringing up with them, especially when they deliver this. But it's not just replace the 3T. It's looking at what that service is that's cost effective for us, for our citizens, who are the predominant users of that.
Well, in simple terms that I can understand, is that a yes or a no?
Maybe.
That sounds like a Metro answer. Thank you.
Just wanted to channel them for you. It's a no if you want a definitive answer as of tonight.
Other things that we have not put a number to in the previous slide are some of our key budget drivers is to provide competitive compensation for our staff. And then, which compensation is about 57% of the general government budget. And then we also have not yet heard from our interjurisdictional partners as to any cost increases that they see on their end. And interjurisdictional agreements are a little over 10% of our general government budget. So little movement on those 2 items could give us more room or more consternation. Also, in FY17, the city manager identified $2.3 million of unmet needs, and so none of those are included in the previous slides. I will turn over the mic to Hunter and Bob Schiller.
Great, thank you. In terms of start off with some enrollment information. In terms of where we are in the current year, our September 30th fall membership number, and the fall membership number on September 30th, that is the year-to-year benchmark that we use to compare one year to the next. It's the number that we report to the State Department of Education. That number this year was 2,670. And that number 1 year ago was 2,509. It's an increase of 161 students, or 6.4%. Last year at this time, when we were working up budget projections, had anticipated about a 3.4% increase in student enrollments, which would have put us at 2,595. So we missed the mark by about 3%, or 75 students. So we are currently in this fall are working with 75 more students than we anticipated coming into the system. In terms
Hunter,
of,
just to stop you, and maybe you'll get to this in the next slide, do we know whether that surprise 3% is evenly distributed across class sizes? Are they coming in the lower grade levels? Do you have any trends or data on that yet?
At this point, yes, you're right. On the next slide, what does that mean in terms of class size? And for my purposes, it's more cut and dry to look at grades kindergarten through 8. They use a different algorithm at the high school where they're on a block schedule and the course loads shift. But this is basically classroom core content teachers. On the far right-hand side is the school board's class size policies that we try to stay within, which is class sizes no greater than 22 students per teacher in grades K through 2, and 24 per teacher in grades 3 through 8. At this point, we've exceeded those policies at the 3 grade levels: kindergarten, 2nd, and 5th. You can see especially at the 5th grade, where all the classes are either 24 or 25 students. At kindergarten, they're nearly all at 24 students.
So slightly different was my question.
Sure.
Is
okay.
I'm curious about whether they're evenly increase, the surprise kind of enrollment that we saw, whether it was evenly distributed, because I wonder whether we're seeing increase in student population across the board, i.e. people are just moving in at all grade levels, or whether they're coming at the really young ages, in which case we're just not capturing or getting data on the people who have not yet entered kindergarten, in which case that's concerning because we need to make sure we do a better job of that for the going forward years.
Yes. Can I get back to you with that information? And you're absolutely right. Kindergarten is the most difficult grade to project.
Hunter, could we also include pre-K in that? Because I think that went up significantly this year, just so that we know what percentage of this is the pre-K level.
Sure, just in terms of the numbers.
Yeah,
absolutely.
How many of the increase came at Jessie Thackeray?
Certainly. Great. In terms of where we've been and where we think we're going, on the left-hand side, the green columns are the actual fall memberships going back to FY99, and the orangish red bars on the right-hand side are the Weldon Cooper projections that we were provided by that organization. At this point, given where we are and what Weldon Cooper is projecting for fall September 30th of 2017, it's an increase of 89 students at this point. And I'll tell you, when I do the analysis of where the kids are coming from, I will include this on a grade level projection as well of where they see the students coming from. As Ms. Ryman said, on the city side, what about 57% of the general government's budget is dedicated to staff salaries, benefits to personnel. I know everybody knows this but on the school side, we're very much a people business. That 85%, nearly 85% of our budget is actually in staff salaries and benefits. As Dr. Schiller pointed out earlier today when I was working with him, if you look at, include the purchase services in that as well, which includes, for example, student tuition, it would be internet, telephone, utilities, building maintenance, technology, insurance, legal fees, security guards, school nurses, things like that, really basics to run your program. You add that 10.3 and that 84.6 together, about 95% of our budget is fixed.
I would like to point out, since I began my interim position last week, but doing a deep dive into your budget because I've been doing this for the last 8-9 years as a consultant around the country. And so with the very able assistance of Lisa and Hunter, we are tearing through everything that's been requested as a bubble up process in the budget and trying to get our arms around just what it is there and what we can do, what we can't do. First of all, these breakouts are consistent with what school district budgets look like nationwide. There's nothing aberrant about the percentages dedicated to each of these areas.